All right. Welcome back, Beruchim Habayim. Nice to see you all after a long pause. Mishpanim Hadashot. We're going to start something new today. Lichvod Shavuot and Sfirat HaOmer. Right? Shavuot is Matan Torah. And many, at least us Moroccans, we have a minhag of reading out a ketubah on Matan Torah, the ketubah, like with us and the Torah, like we're getting married to the Torah. We do azharot. Azharot is like a piyut going through all the mitzvot. All right, so we're not going to go through all the mitzvot today, and not until Shavuot, but we're going to start learning Sefer HaMitzvot. What is Sefer HaMitzvot? Sefer HaMitzvot is basically the Rambam wrote this book as preparing the groundwork for the Mishneh Torah. And we'll see, we're going to go through his mental process, why he wrote Sefer HaMitzvot and what it is. And then I'll share some other ideas of how we're going to do this little series until Shavuot. Maybe we'll also continue a little bit after Shavuot. All right, but we're not going to go through all 613 mitzvot. All right, so and no, but I encourage you take advantage of this time during Sfirat HaOmer until Shavuot and on Shavuot, right? You can either read Sefer HaMitzvot, which he explains every mitzvah what it is and why he decided that this is a mitzvah. We'll see what that means soon. Or you can just read the list of the mitzvot. In the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, he just lists all the mitzvot without explaining what each one is. The explanation is in this book, and the entire Mishneh Torah is explaining how to perform the mitzvot. Okay? Problem.
If one reads Mishneh Torah,
Yes.
should he read the Sefer HaMitzvot, or it's sufficient? Not
It's two different things.
okay.
It's two different things. Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam wrote in order to decide what the mitzvot are. What does that mean? We'll see soon. Right? But he wrote it as a pretext. It's an introduction to more for himself and to prove to others why these are the mitzvot, right? But it was for the sake of the Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah will teach you how to perform the mitzvot. Sefer HaMitzvot just tells you what each mitzvah is, without all the halachot. For instance, Hilchot Shabbat, it includes a couple of mitzvot in it, but it's 30 chapters in the Mishneh Torah of all of Hilchot Shabbat. Tzitzit is like one mitzvah. You have a few chapters on what is Hilchot Tzitzit. All right? So, מפני שקדם לנו החיבור המפורסם אשר קראנו אותו פירוש המשנה, says, I have already published my previous book that became very, very famous, and it was copied all over the Jewish world. Right? Everyone was studying this book, the Pirush of the Mishnah. Right? He wrote a commentary to the entire Mishnah. והייתה כוונתנו בחיבור ההוא לקצר ביאור ההלכה מן המשנה. And what was our purpose? By the way, this is also very important to understand what the purpose of every book that Rambam wrote. What was the purpose of the book? Because then after people come and challenge things that he says in the book, and he says, yeah, well, because the purpose of this book wasn't to go into detail. It was just to explain something. Right? So you have to understand what's the purpose of every book that Rambam wrote. So what was the purpose of his commentary to the Mishnah? Biur halacha min Mishnah. What is the halacha of the Mishnah? What is the halacha? What we call today Mishnah, like Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Bet, Mishnah Gimel, that is called halacha. What is halacha? Most people think the term halacha means like a law. Halacha means a formulated statement that needs to be recited precisely as it's written. Right? The first halacha that is a binding halacha is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first text of the oral tradition that has a specific formulation, and you have to read it as it's written. Okay, that's as opposed to, what's the opposite of halacha? Anyone know what's the opposite of halacha? Agada. Agada doesn't need to be repeated word for word. Agada is you transmit the idea and you explain it in your own words. Halacha is you transmit the exact formulation as it's written. So he says, what is the purpose of the Pirush HaMishnayot? Is to explain the halacha of the Mishnah. ולא הייתה בו כוונתנו להשלים דין כל מצווה, right? And it wasn't part of our purpose to explain every single nuance of the halacha, right? Because you have the Mishnah or the halacha, then you have a Talmud that completely, they're all discussing the Mishnah and they bring many other arguments and they bring many other halachot, right? I'm not getting into all of that. I just want to explain what this Mishnah says. All right? That's the purpose of Pirush HaMishnayot. ולהביא כל מה שיצטרך מאסור ומותר וחייב ופטור, and to bring you from what was stated in the Mishnah, what is permissible, what is forbidden, what do you have to do, what are you exempt from doing or exempt of punishment from. כמו שיתבאר למי שישתדל באותו חיבור. Right, as is apparent to anybody who studied this book, they understand what the purpose of the book is. ראיתי גם כן, and I also found it necessary, שאחבר חיבור יכלול דיני התורה ומשפטיה. I also found it necessary to write a book that will include all the mitzvot of the Torah and all the halachot, עד שלא יהיה דבר חסר ממנו, until there is nothing missing from this book of all the halachot that you need to know, not just what was mentioned in the Mishnah. ושאעשה בו דבר שהוא מנהגי לעשותו, and I'm going to go in accordance to how I always approach these texts. לעזוב זיכרון המחלוקת ומאמרים הנדחים. I am going to omit all the back and forth, all the opposing opinions and the opinions that were rejected. What does that mean? In the Talmud, right? They're discussing halacha. One Hacham says, this is the explanation of the Mishnah. Another Hacham says, this is the explanation of the Mishnah. We have two potential explanations. Each one tries to prove his point, right? One of them eventually gets accepted and the other rejected. It says, I'm not going to bring all the mahlukot, and I'm not going to mention the opinion that was rejected. Only what the bottom line of the Talmud was.
It's always two, or it can be three or
Well, it could be.
Okay.
It could be. Yeah.
That's okay.
It could be not only. Sometimes they branch out. There's two opposing opinions, right? And then there's two opposing opinions of what this opinion really is. So it could branch out, right? He says, it's very complicated. I'm writing a book so that when you want to study halacha, right, you don't have to get lost in all of these discussions. I'm going to bring you the conclusion. At the end, what did they say? Which was the opinion that was accepted?
How big is this book, Sefer HaMitzvot? Zero?
This is Sefer HaMitzvot. But what we're discussing is talking about the book that he's planning on writing, is the Mishneh Torah. It's exactly 1,000 chapters. And it covers all the 613 mitzvot.
If you read one chapter a day, it will take you
3 years. 3 years. Yes.
I saw that the foreign publishers, they come out with translation in English of the Mishneh Torah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't know.
There is, yeah, there are. Yeah, there are printed English editions.
I don't know which volume they
By the
are.
way, you also get like the previous course that we did up until our vacation. It was all from the Mishneh Torah, and on Chabad, probably also on Sefaria and also Machon Mamre. They have like free versions of English and Hebrew of the Mishneh Torah.
The thing is, like, they added the Steinsalt's comments.
Hmm.
They added the Rav Steinsalt's comments on the Mishneh Torah.
All right, great. Great Talmid Chachamim. All right, La'azov Zichron HaMachlokot. I'm not going to bring all the different opposing opinions and the rejected opinions. V'shelo avi bo ki'im halacha pesuka. And all I'm going to bring is the bottom line. What is the Pesak halacha? V'yesha hiburahu kolel kol dine Torat Moshe. Right? And this book is going to include all the mitzvot that we received from Moshe. מה שצריך בזמן הגלות ומה שאיננו צריך. Everything that includes what is required of us even while we're in galut. Why is he saying this? Because the Rambam isn't the first person to write a halachic code, right? Some of the Geonim started. We have Sefer Halachot Gedolot, we have Sheiltot de Rav Ahai, and we have the Rambam's father's teacher, Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, the Rif, who wrote also, it's called Hilchot Harif. But they only addressed the things that the people were asking about and the people needed. And this was all written during the Galut. So it only addressed the mitzvot that we need to do while they were in Galut, like Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Kashrut. When it comes to Hilchot Shevi'it, when it comes to Tirumot and Ma'asrot, when it comes to the Mikdash, nobody wrote anything. So he says, I'm going to write a book that includes everything, what we need in times of Galut, and also what we're going to need in times of Geulah or today. So really, he's the only one who wrote a halachic code that is relevant for all aspects of our life today as well. והיה הנאות אצלי להפיל ממנו האריכות וסמיכות בזיכרון בעלי הקבלה. Also, I don't want to make it super long, this book, so I'm not going to say who mentioned this halacha, right? Was it Abaye? Was it Rabbi Akiva? Was it whoever, right? I'm not going to mention the name of the person who stated this halacha in the Mishnah or in the Talmud. עד שלא אומר דברי פלוני, ולא רבי פלוני אומר כך וכך. I'm not going to say this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, or this is the statement of Rabbi Ishmael, right? אבל אזכיר חכמי המשנה וחכמי התלמוד, זיכרון כולל בתחילת החיבור. However, at the beginning of the book, as he did in the Pirush HaMishnayot, and also in his introduction to the Mishneh Torah, I am going to tell you the names of all the people that are responsible for our chain of transmission, of the tradition from one generation to the other. Ve'omar ki dinei haTorah kulam. I'll say that all the laws of the Torah, hu Torah shebe'al peh. It is an oral tradition, מקובלים מפלוני ומפלוני עד עזרא עד משה רבנו. Right? These are laws that we received in tradition, right? One person from another. In the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, he goes through 40 generations who were the heads of the Supreme Court in each generation, right? All the way from the sealing of the Talmud of Ravina and Rav Ashi goes backwards and backwards till he gets to Ezra, till he goes to the Nevi'im, until he gets to Moshe Rabbeinu, 40 generations. ואזכור עם כל אחד ואחד מי שמקבלים ממנו, כל זה לבקשת הכיסור. Right? And I'm going to mention every person in this chain of tradition who he received the tradition from. So he actually goes both ways. So he starts off with Moshe, says who his student was, Yehoshua, and then goes his student, and his student, and his student, goes down 40 generations. And then he goes backwards 40 generations. Right? It's like anyone can tell you the alphabet, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? Now go backwards. Right? Start from Z and start going backwards down. But if you know the relationships between everybody, it's not a big deal. Right? I know my grandfather's name and his son's name and his son's name, me and my son's name, right? And I can go the same way back. In our case, it's very easy. It's Shmuel and Moshe. Keep switching. So,
How many generations are between Rambam and Rabbi Akiva?
I'd have to figure that. But Rabbi Akiva is the end of the Tanaim, and the Rambam is like third generation of the Rishonim. And between them you have Amoraim, I think it's like 5 generations. You have the Geonim, it's another 5 generations at least, and Savoraim, which is 3 generations. So yeah, you have a couple of generations. By the way, all this, if anyone has seen, I posted a new series, a YouTube series that I'm doing every day during Sfirat HaOmer. I'm releasing a video, right? From each video is built on the previous one in order to give you an entire overview of the transmission of the Torah Shebe'al Peh. Right,
So
starting from Moshe and until the future.
we should start wishing from the beginning, right?
Preferably, yeah. By the way, it's the previous course that we did, right? The course on the introduction to the oral Torah. It's all constructed from that. But it's now, instead of an hour class, it's 5 minutes each video.
Short and sweet.
So he says, I'm just going to mention at the beginning the chain of tradition without specifying in each halacha who said, right? And just know that all these halachot are from people in this chain of tradition. I'm not going to write it in the language of the Tanakh. Because that specific language is too limited for us, as in not enough people speak the language of the Tanakh that we have a full vocabulary so that I can express all the halachic ideas in the language, the Hebrew of the Tanakh. And I'm also not going to write it in the language of the Gemara, of the Talmud, because then only individuals throughout the entire nation are actually going to understand it. And many of the words in the Talmud, they're foreign to us. We don't know them, right? The Talmud was written in Babylon under the Persian Empire. They were speaking Aramaic, and then it was conquered by the Muslims. The whole world in the Rambam's time is speaking Arabic. Nobody knows this language unless they specifically study it for the purpose of Talmud. Right? So vikashot, that is difficult terms even for those people who are fluent in the Talmud. Aval ahaberehu bilshon ha-mishnah. I'm going to use the phrasing, the language of the Mishnah for this book. Kedei sheyakel ze larov. So it'll be easily accessible for everybody. By the way, Sefer HaMitzvot was written in Arabic. He's talking about the Mishneh Torah. ואשלים בו כל מה שהתאמת והתברר ממאמרי התורה עד שלא יחסר שום שאלה צריכה שלא אזכרה. All right, and I'm going to, he's very, very ambitious, the Rambam. But there's a method to his ambition. he has ways of achieving this ambition. And we're going to see his thought process, how he plans this masterpiece, this halachic masterpiece, right? He says, I'm going to include everything, right? Everything that was verified, v'hidbarer, and explained, mima'amare haTorah. That was from the statements of the Torah, specifically legal statements. Until there won't be any questions left that I haven't addressed. או אזכור שורש תצא ממנו השאלה ההיא מהר מבלתי עיון דק. He says, or I will explain to you the reasoning so that with new situations you can deduce for yourself what the halacha should be if it's not something specified already in the Mishneh Torah. כי כוונתי בו גם כן הקיצור עם הכללות. Because also here I want it on the one hand to be as brief as possible and on the other hand to encompass everything. עד שימצא בו כל מה שימצא במשנה ובתלמוד וספרה וספרי ותוספתא. Right, so that every halacha that was brought in the Mishnah and in the Talmud and in the Tanaic literature, the Sifra and the Sifri and the Tosefta, which maybe for those of you who remember was the student of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who published the Mishnah. His student wrote an explanation, a Tosefta, on the Mishnah. It says everything that was mentioned in these literature, I'm going to bring you the bottom line. וכל מה שהוציאו הגאונים המאוחרים, right? And then after the Talmud was sealed, we have a couple generations of the heads of the yeshivot of Bavel. They're called the Geonim, right? And they were writing letters, answering questions to people throughout the entire Jewish world. It says, I'm going to include, right, whatever they published, ube'eru, and what they explained, ufirshu me'asur u'mutar, tameh v'tahor, right, what is permitted, what is forbidden, what is pure, and what is impure, right? These things, pure and impure, are not relevant during times of Galut. It's only relevant regarding the Mikdash, right? V'kasher, pasul, v'kasher, what is kasher, what is forbidden, hayav u'patur, mishalem, ve'eno mishalem, who is liable to pay the damages and who is exempt from paying damages, nishba u'patur minishava, who has a requirement to make an oath in front of the court and who is exempt from making an oath in the court. ובכלל שלא יצטרך עמו אחר התורה ספר אחר זולתו. Right? And in general, that nobody will need, after reading the Torah, any other book except the Mishneh Torah, this book that I'm planning on writing, in order to know לדעת ממנו דבר שיצטרך בכל התורה. Right? Anything you want to know, says according to the Rambam, the objective of the Mishneh Torah that I'm going to write is that all you need is to read the Torah shebichtav, right? The 5 books or the Tanakh, and you read my Mishneh Torah, because I bring you the bottom line of what the halacha is, and you don't need any other book to know how to fulfill the mitzvot of the Torah, ben mideoraita, ben midrabbanan, whether they are biblical laws or rabbinic decrees. It'll all be included in the Mishneh Torah, and you will be able to know exactly what mitzvah is deoraita and what mitzvah is dirabbanan, a biblical, a rabbinic decree. Any questions so far? Okay. וכאשר כיוונתי בדעתי התכלית הזאת, and when I thought of this, had this vision to make this masterpiece, right? שמתי מחשבתי באיזה פנים מחלק החיבור ושעריו. I started to think, how am I going to organize this book? איך ראוי שיהיה, right? How is it going to be? אם החלקה כמו חילוק המשנה, am I going to divide it, structure it the way the Mishnah is structured? The Mishnah has 6 sedarim, and each seder has certain masechtot, right? אם החלקה כמו חילוק המשנה ויספיק לו דרכו, and the ways of the Mishnah will suffice, או אם החלקה הוא חילוק אחר, or I'll find some other structure, והקדים מה שיחייב העיון שהוא היותר ראוי והיותר נקה ללמוד, and I'll structure it in a way that first I'm going to bring the easier things to study and then build up, right? It'll start easier and then it'll get more complex and more complex. ונראה לי שהטוב שתהיה חלוקתו שיושם הלכות מקום מסכתות המשנה. It says instead of doing like Masechet Berachot, right, which Masechet Berachot can include the laws of Kriyat Shema and the laws of Birkat HaMazon and the laws of Berachot, right? He says I'm going to divide it into subjects and call each one of those subjects halachot, or we call it Chativat halachot, right? So Ilchot Berachot deals with saying blessings. Ilchot Kriyat Shema deals with anything regarding Kriyat Shema. Ilchot Tefillah is completely dedicated to how to do Tefillah. Ad sheyomar bo Ilchot Sukkah, Ilchot Lulav, Ilchot Tefillin, Ilchot Sisit, Ilchot Mezuzah, V'sha'achalek haklal lifrakim. And each one of these I'm going to divide into chapters. Like we said, Ilchot Shabbat is 30 chapters. The halachot, kmo sheta'aseh ha-mishnah. And each one of these chapters will be also divided into halachot. What is halachot? Which is specific paragraphs with a very specific formulation. The same way that the Mishnah is ultimately divided, the smallest unit of a Mishnah is a halacha that you can recite. Ad sheyeh derech mashal בהלכות תפילין, פרק ראשון ושני ושלישי. For instance, you get to הלכות תפילין, there will be chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, וכל פרק, and every chapter נחלק להלכות is divided into these halachot paragraphs, כדי שיהיה נקל לדעת אותו על פה. This way it'll be easily recitable, meaning can transmit it or recite it orally off by heart. The idea of the Mishnah and of each halacha in the Mishneh Torah is to be able to recite the halachot off by heart. למי שירצה או לזכור דבר ממנו, for anyone who wants to recite it off by heart or to memorize it. והוא מבואר כי בהיות החלוקה כן, right, and it's explained, and because it's going to be divided this way, שהמצווה אחת עשה או לא תעשה, אין ראוי לחלק דיניה בשני עניינים. Right, so for instance, in Ilchot Shabbat, you have some mitzvot aseh, positive mitzvot, and you also have negative mitzvot, mitzvot lo ta'aseh. And so if we're going to now structure the book by not by mitzvah, explain all the halachot of every mitzvah, but we're going to take a topic, and the topic is Shabbat, then we're going to have to cover in that topic a whole bunch of mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo ta'aseh. It's not going to be mitzvah, it's going to be a whole bunch of mitzvot, some positive and some negative. אבל כל מה שיצטרך, ודבר מבואר כי בחלוקה שהמצווה אחת אין ראוי לחלק דינה בשני עניינים. Right? We're not going to separate the mitzvot aseh and the mitzvot lo ta'aseh into two separate topics. אבל כל מה שיצטרך בה מן החלוקה יהיה בפרקים שבאותו הכלל. But everything that we need, right, in this division will be in the chapters of that topic. ופעמים יהיה בכלל האחד מספר כמה מן המצוות. And sometimes in one topic you'll have a couple of mitzvot. אם בעבור שיהיה להם עניין אחד שיחר אליהם, because maybe there's one topic that is common to all of them, או שיהיו המצוות בכוונה אחת, ואומר דרך משל, כי כשאדבר בעבודה זרה, for instance, when I speak about הלכות עבודה זרה, I'm also going to include in עבודה זרה, הנה אחבר בו דיני מצוות רבות, it's going to include a whole bunch of different מצוות, מסית ומדיח, somebody who tries to get you to do avodah zarah, that's one mitzvah. Uma'avir lamolech, someone who has, it's a type of avodah zarah where you have your son or your first sons go through a fire for the molech. Umitnabe bishma, or someone who prophesies in the name of avodah zarah. Ve'oved ota, and someone who performs a worship. וזולת אלו ממה שאין מן המצוות, מה שהוא מן המצוות בעניין עבודה זרה לבד. So even עבודה זרה could include many different types of עבודה זרה. Each one has its own mitzvah to all be included in this section of הלכות עבודה זרה. וכן כשאומר הלכות איסורי מזבח, הדבר בכלל הזו, על שאור ודבש ובעלי מומין ותנן זונה ומחיר כלב ודומה להן. So too when I talk about the halachot regarding the altar, the mizbeach, so too I'm going to include in it whatever has to do with korbanot that you can bring to the mizbeach, because they all have one common theme to them. And so because of this, right, so I want to make a book that encompasses everything, right? No questions. Any halacha that was stated in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, Tosefta, whatever, they're going to be in this book. This book is going to be divided by, it's actually going to be divided, it's 14 volumes, right? It's going to be divided into halachot, Hilchot Shabbat, Hilchot Avodah Zarah, Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, right? So because I want to divide it this way, I saw, ראיתי שהוא ראוי שאשים תחילה בפתיחת הספר מצוות המצוות כולם עשה ולא תעשה. So first, I need to list all the mitzvot, right? I'm going to do a book that covers all the halachot of all 613 mitzvot. So first I need to list the mitzvot. What are the 613 mitzvot? עד שתבוא חלוקת הספר על כללם. This way the book encompasses all of them. ולא תמלט מצווה שלא נשלם הדיבור בדיניה. And there isn't going to be one mitzvah left aside that I forgot to mention and tell you what the halachot regarding this mitzvah are. אם בפרט כמו סוכה ולולב וציצית, right? Because if I don't list hilchot, right, the mitzvah of sukkah, I may completely forget to address any of the halachot that have to do with sukkah. כי כל אחד מהן סובלת הדיבור בפרט, because each one of these has its own, like as opposed to avodah zarah. Avodah zarah includes many different mitzvot, right? Hilchot sukkah is one mitzvah of the sukkah, right? Lulav is one mitzvah of the lulav, right? Any one of these can be standalone, and I may forget it if I don't first list the mitzvot and check it off after I finish discussing all the halachot regarding that mitzvah. או על כלל מצוות מהם כמו שזכרנו אחר שנמנה אותם. ונאמר שהלכות עבודה זרה, alright? וכך וכך מצוות לא תעשה, ואלו הם אלו. That's why every time I open up a section, right? הלכות עבודה זרה has this many מצוות עשה, this many מצוות לא תעשה. These are the מצוות עשה and לא תעשה. And now I'm going to explain all the halachot regarding these mitzvot. זה כולו, all of this effort, להישמר שלא יעדר ממנו דבר שלא אדבר בו. Another translation, שלא יעדר ממני דבר. All this is so that there isn't a single mitzvah that I forget to address when writing this book. ובזוכרי כל המצוות במספר הייתי בטוח מזה. And when I count all the mitzvot, and I know that they're all in the list, I can be sure that I won't forget any of the mitzvot. All right, so then why do we need Sefer HaMitzvot? Well, just a list of mitzvot. ואחר שנשלם לי זה העניין, and after I figured this out, that first I need to list all the mitzvot aseh and all the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, and make sure I have 613 mitzvot and divide them into their different corresponding halachot, right? I realized that there's a little problem with that. והשתדלתי לעשות הספר ולזכור המצוות כולם, זיכרון מוחלט, ומספרם בפתיחת הספר, right? In the beginning of the book, in the introduction, I want to write all the mitzvot. התעוררתי אל השורש שכבר עלה בדעתי זה שנים רבות. I suddenly remembered this problem that I've been struggling with for many years. והוא במה שמונין מניין המצוות, הנה נשתבשו בו רבים בעניינים לא אוכל לספר גודל גנותם. It says that we already have a few people who listed the mitzvot. However, they made some terrible mistakes in their list of the mitzvot. Some of the mistakes are so great, I can't even describe how big a mistake it is. For instance, we're going to see, he's going to mention, right, like mitzvat bikur holim. So it's not one of the 630 mitzvot. It's halacha d'Rabbanan, right? It's associated with a certain mitzvah. How about mitzvat ner Hanukkah? He says, is that one of the 613 mitzvot? That's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic decree. How do you list that as one of the 613 mitzvot? Right? These are previous lists. The very famous lists of mitzvot. One of them written by the Geonim. Actually, both of them are written by the Geonim. Right? It says, how do you make this mistake? Right? If I follow this list of mitzvot, my book isn't going to be complete. It's going to be wrong. It's going to be faulty. Anyone who tried to list the mitzvot, או לחבר ספר מדבר מהכוונה הזאת, or anyone who tried to write a book, right, with this objective, נמשכו כולם אחר דברי הלכות, בעל הלכות גדולות. Everyone followed the first listing of בעל הלכות גדולות. Right? Nobody even tried to make their own listing. They all went according to this first person who published his list of mitzvot, and nobody deviated from that. ולא נטו מכוונתו במספרם כי אם נטייה קטנה. And if any of them deviated, it was very, very minor. כאילו הם כולם עמדו אצל מאמר האיש, as if they all received, right, his list of mitzvot, as if, as we would say today, as if it was Torah Misinai. Right? At Shebal Sefer HaMitzvot HaMefurusam, he's talking about a different person who wrote a book called Sefer HaMitzvot. Right? ראיתי שהנגיש על חלק קטן משיבושי בעל הלכות גדולות, והרחיק שימנה ביקור חולים וניחום אבנים כמו שבנה בעל הלכות. And then I see that there's also, his name is Rav Hefes, he also wrote a book called Sefer HaMitzvot, and he made his own list of the mitzvot. And he had some criticism on, right, Baal Halachot Gidolot, that he listed certain mitzvot that he thinks shouldn't be listed as part of the mitzvot, like Nichum Avenim and Bikur Cholim, right? Uma she'erchiku rachok, right? And the things that he rejected as part of the 630 mitzvot, they really are, he's right, they weren't really properly listed. אבל הביא יותר רחוק ממנו. But he also brought even weirder things than בעל הלכות גדולות. ונמשך אחריו ומשהו יותר מגונה, כמו שהתבהר למי שיעיין במאמרנו זה. ויודע האל יתברך, right, and God knows, ודי בו עדות, right, and this is testimony, כי אני כל מה שהסתכלתי בשיבושים ומה שימנו, והיותם מונים מה שנראה בתחילת המחשבה שאין ראוי למנותו, right, that everyone who followed this wrong listing, נמשכו קצתם אחר קצתם, they each followed one after the other, בזה, מבלי הסתכלות גדול, right, they didn't do a deep research analysis, וגדל בעיניי אסוננו, and I see this as a great tragedy, ונתעמת אצלי חיוב ייעוד אשר יעדנו, ותהי לכם חזות הכל כדברי הספר החתום, all right, and so that's why I found it necessary, before writing the Mishneh Torah, I need to first list the mitzvot, but before listing the mitzvot, I need to address what is a mitzvah and what isn't a mitzvah. And he brings, we're going to see later, he brings 14 rules of what qualifies something as a mitzvah or disqualifies something as a mitzvah. Right? Not every pasuk in the Torah, not every pasuk that God says to do something is necessarily a mitzvah or is necessarily one of the 613 mitzvot. What does that mean? What does that mean? No, you're right to think.
I was thinking about the 40 rules to decide what was
14.
14.
Yeah.
That's where is that written?
Here, he's going to list them. Right. By the way, the Rambam Rambam loves the number 14 for some reason. All right, he has 14 rules. We're gonna read the rules, probably not today, maybe next week. We'll read the 14 rules. But 30 pages in this introduction is explaining the 14 rules. Right? 14 books of the Mishneh Torah. Right? When I was working on the Mishneh Torah and we were coming up with a new scientific edition of the Mishneh Torah, back when I was in yeshiva, we started indexing the schematics. The Rambam has his own pictures that he made in the Mishneh Torah, comes out to 14. Right? I'm kind of surprised that there's only 13 ikarim and not 14.
It's hidden somewhere.
Could be. Could be there's a 14th ikar or something. The truth is, I think there's other things that he says is an ikar, even though he doesn't list it as one of the 13. So,
Does he provide an example of the situation where God commands something in the Torah which is not considered mitzvah?
yes, a few things. One, and we'll see in the 14 rules, a mitzvah that's a general mitzvah. For instance, a mitzvah to follow the Torah. It says you can't list that as one of the 613. Not only that, but there are mitzvot that God commands or commanded. For instance, on Friday, collect a double portion of the man. Right? That's a mitzvah that's only valid in the desert. Right? It's a mitzvah that God commanded, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. Does that answer your question?
So what do you call it again on the mitzvah, on the yeshiva, the project that you search? The 14 things that you not listed? Could you repeat
Oh
that?
no, it's just it's an edition of the Mishneh Torah.
So did he make pictures? What did he do?
So the Rambam, when he wrote the Mishneh Torah, for instance, you know that sketch of the the Chanukiah, the Chabad Chanukiah, that's the triangle. Huh?
67? Is that what you're talking about?
No, just that we think of a Chanukiah with round branches, right? If you look at Chabad, they make triangle branches. Why? Because that's based on the sketch of the Rambam, right? Yeah, although I don't think that the Rambam meant it to be a triangular Chanukiah or menorah. he's not much of an artist. You see also when he draws the map of Eretz Yisrael, one of his sketches is the map of Eretz Yisrael. It's very, very schematic. It's like straight lines like that, right? To say this is the Gvul. Yeah, probably, yeah. But he was very like, in his schematics. So when he's saying when he does it like that, the point is to tell you because on each arch there's a ra'amon, it's called pa'amon, verimon, v'pa'amon, right? And so he wants to show you the order of those things on the arch, but he doesn't make a round arch. And I get it because you'd have to. It's not easy to get, but if you make it straight, it's much easier.
He was a practical guy.
Yeah, it was very practical. It was a sketch. It was how do you call it? It's a schematic. It's not doesn't represent real life, right? So I don't think you can learn from that sketch that the Rambam really thought that it's triangular and not arched. Maybe he did.
Don't know.
Maybe he does. Maybe he does. His opinion is that it is that, but I don't think that's a proof that he thinks it's right, because I don't think he thinks Eretz Yisrael is like that either, right? And he actually was here, as opposed to, let's say, Rashi, who described Eretz Yisrael, but he was never actually here.
Would be from the very place of his student there, is just for the debate.
I have no idea. I haven't. Yeah. The Rambam would be against me going to his grave anyway, so.
Why?
He doesn't believe in praying at graves. He says, study my books, it's better. וכן, כל מה ששמעתי, האזהרות רבות, המספר, right? We said that in Shavuot, right? We have a minhag that we read out these piyutim, and these piyutim cover, by the way, I have in my machzor, it's like a 30-page piyut, right? That the Moroccans sing on minha of Shavuot. It's a 30-page piyut going through all the 613 mitzvot. The one problem is that they're based on the wrong list of mitzvot, right? So you see the Rambam is talking about it. These are the great Paitanim of Spain who lived before the Rambam, right? He says that they were Paitanim, right? Rabot HaMispar HaMchubarot Etzenu Be'eretz Sefarad, right? All of these azharot that we see that were made on the list of mitzvot in Spain. Nebchu Tziri, Nebchu Alai Tziri, he's really lamenting. It's like, oh my God, it's like I wanted to like tear out my ears, right? Lema she'er'eh oto mipirsum ha'inyan vehigaloto, right? That it's so famous, this list of mitzvot, that it was incorporated into piyutim, and it's a wrong list of mitzvot. V'im en laha shimam, right? But you can't really blame them because those people who wrote these azharot, they were poets and they weren't scholars. Some of them were actually scholars, but they were poets, and right? And as far as we'll call it a professionalism, they did their best professionally to make it a beautiful song, right, with proper incantation and proper rhyming, and to make it as beautiful as possible, right? But what are they going to do? They're not going to now analyze every single mitzvah. Is this a mitzvah? Was it quoted in the Sifra? Did the Chachamim say this is a mitzvah deoraita or not? Right? So they just relied on what was available to them, and they built their piyut on that. Aval במובן מהדברים נמשכו בו אחר בעל הלכות גדולות, and they all went according to the listing of בעל הלכות גדולות, וזולתו מהרבנים המתאחרים, and likewise of the later rabbis. וכאשר התבוננתי בזה, right, and when I was contemplating this, וידעתי פרסום העניין הזה בידי ההמון, and I understood how prevalent this list of mitzvot is among the masses, among everybody. ידעתי כי אם אזכור אני המניין האמיתי שראוי שימנה זיכרון מוחלט מבלתי ראיה. So I knew that if I would now just come up, right, my list of mitzvot, the real list of mitzvot, as I see fit, without bringing a proof for every single mitzvah, why is this a mitzvah and why this isn't a mitzvah, הנה הקורא הראשון, the first person who reads it, שיקראהו יחייב במחשבתו שזה טעות. Right, the first person who reads is just going to assume that I'm wrong. Right, that if I didn't list Bikur Halim or Mitzvat Ner Hanukkah as one of the 630 mitzvot, he's just going to assume that I made a mistake. ותהיה ראיה, הטעות אצלו ראות בחילוף מה שזכר פלוני ופלוני. And what is going to be his proof that I am wrong? That it doesn't match what Rabbi Shimon Kiara said or Baal Halachot Gedolot said in his list of the mitzvot. Right? So I can't just list the 613 mitzvot. The first person who reads my list, as soon as he sees it's different from someone else's list, he'll just assume that I'm wrong without even analyzing or trying to pay attention. כי זהו בכל רוב אנשי הסגולה בזמננו זה, right? Because this is how it is even with many of our scholars. If you say something that contradicts a previous scholar, the assumption is that you're wrong, right? And this isn't how it should be. כי לא יבחינו המאמר בעניינו, לא יבחנו המאמר בעניינו. They're not going to evaluate the statement on its own merit. אבל בהסכימו למאמר מי שקדם, but only if it agrees to the statement of a previous scholar, בלתי בחינת המאמר הקודם, without evaluating the previous statement either. Meaning, if it was stated, most people, he says, even the scholars, right, even on the individual basis, their modus apparatus, the way they operate is, well, if it's different than what he said, and he's a gaon, then it must be wrong, without evaluating if he said was right, and if what I said was right. All right? Kol sheken hahamon. Even more so, the public, the masses. All right, so, all right, I think we have time for another paragraph. ולכן ראיתי, and so I saw that I need to first, before listing the mitzvot, שאקדים לפני החיבור שזכרתי מאמר, right, before bringing that Mishneh Torah, writing the Mishneh Torah and listing the mitzvot, והוא הספר הזה, and that's this book where I need to prove every single mitzvah, why I think, and basically prove definitively why this is a mitzvah that should be counted as part of the 613 mitzvot, ובו עניין המצוות ואיך ראוי שימנו, and what is the proper method for deciding if a mitzvah should be counted as one of the 613. ואביא ראיה על זה מכתובי התורה, and I'm going to prove it through the text of the Torah, ומאמרי החכמים בפירוש, and the explicit statements of the Chachamim, meaning the Tanaim, or in the Talmud. ואקדים שורשים ראויים לסמוך עליהם. And first I'm going to give you certain rules, and then he's going to prove each one of these rules, why this is a rule that we need to rely upon in order to decide definitively if a certain mitzvah is one of the 613 mitzvot. במצוות ובמספרם, וכשיתאמת מספרם במאמר הזה, בראיה מבוארת, אין ספק בה. Right? And when we validate or prove in this book, right, in a definitive proof that there is no safek, no, how do you say when you prove in court someone, in order to execute someone, it needs to be beyond a reasonable doubt, right? This is not beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, right? I'm going to prove to you every single mitzvah beyond any doubt. אז יתבאר למי שיקראו טעות כל מי שמנה חילוף מה שמנינו אנחנו. Because then anybody who reads this will understand the error of anyone who listed a different list than mine. ואין אנחנו צריכים להשיב על כל אחד בפרט ולא לבאר את טעותו. I don't need to explain the mistake of every single mitzvah that a different person counted, כי התועלת והתכלית המכוונת בזה מאמר תגיע למבקשיה בזולת זה. Because we don't need that. I just need to prove what is the correct list of mitzvot. וזה כי אני מבאר המצוות כולם ומספרם מצווה מצווה, right? And I'm going to explain every single mitzvah, ואביא ראיה על כל מה שיש בו ספק, and I'm going to prove it, I'll bring a specific proof for each thing, ואין כוונתי בזה המאמר לבאר דין מצווה מן המצוות, אבל מספרם לבד. Says, my intention in this book is not to explain the mitzvot, right? Not to tell you what are all the halachot regarding each mitzvah. The whole purpose of this entire book is just to prove to you what the proper list of mitzvot are, which he brings in the introduction to the Mishneh Torah, in order to serve as a foundation for writing the Mishneh Torah. I only want to tell you what the list of the mitzvot is and no more. And if I bring any explanation when listing the mitzvot, it's just to explain like the pasuk. What does it mean? Right? What does it mean Shabbat? Well, Shabbat means that you need to not do work on the seventh day, right? Without going into all the melachot and what you could do and shvot and all that, right? Just so you know what this mitzvah is talking about. מזה המאמר, אז אזכרם זיכרון מוחלט בתחילת החיבור הכולל מה שזכרנו. Right? And once I have the proper list of mitzvot and I prove every single one, I can just list them in the introduction to the Mishneh Torah without needing to prove every single one. All right, so we'll stop here. Talking about 14 in the Moreh Nevuchim, the guide for the perplexed, at the end of the Moreh is dedicated to Ta'ameh HaMitzvot. What is the purpose of the mitzvot? And he divides them into, who can guess how many categories? 14 categories. All right, so what I want to do with the rest of this course until Shavuot, well, probably not going to finish before Shavuot, maybe we'll continue after, is take one or two of these categories in each class from the Moreh, understand the purpose of those categories of mitzvot, and hopefully also learn the meaning of a few of those mitzvot and how they fulfill the idea, the purpose of the category as he listed them in the Moreh Nevuchim. Okay? I highly recommend reading either the list of mitzvot or Sefer HaMitzvot. I'm sure they have it in English. I'm going to warn you, some of them are really short, like this is a mitzvah, this is a mitzvah, this is a mitzvah. Some of them could be like 5-6 pages. The class we had on Kiddush HaChodesh was like a long piece of one mitzvah in Sefer HaMitzvot when we're learning. If you remember the class on Kiddush HaChodesh. Any questions? Or is everything understood definitively without any safek?
Why does he write in such a way that some mitzvot are just one line and some mitzvot take a few pages?
Some mitzvot, there's not much to prove about them. Some of them he really needs to prove. Some of them are complicated. You see, when you go over the 14 general rules, some of them aren't so obvious. Because some mitzvot aren't stated in the Torah. Only the punishment on the mitzvah is stated, and therefore we know that there's a mitzvah not to do that, right?
What others, do they agree on the list of Rambam?
The Ramban wrote a book criticizing this Sefer HaMitzvot. It's called the Hasagot, and not everyone agrees with every single Pesach, but as a list of mitzvot, no one else actually wrote a list of mitzvot based on something else, meaning all the others, any later whatever, like Yityachasut to the mitzvot was built on the Sefer HaMitzvot. All right, excellent. So, inshallah, next week we'll start with seeing the categories in the Moreh Nevuchim. All right, Erev Tov.
Thank you.
Stop the recording.
Thank you. Yom Tov.
Stop.